pocket outside. My outside pocket.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Walter Fox.
Hi. I'm a criminal lawyer like Lawrence. You won't believe this, but I'm actually older than he is. And I agree with everything Lawrence has said. I take a slightly different perspective because I grew up with this system as it came to exist in our courts. And the first thing I want to talk about is how did we get here? Now, some of you have heard me talk about this before, but the historical background starts with the feminist movement in the United States in the mid-'70s. Professor Murray Strauss at the University of New Hampshire in 1979 or 80, a feminist, discerned that violence in the community at large was perpetrated by men. It's a fact in Canada that violence in the community is perpetrated mostly by men. It was a slam dunk. Let's look at relationships, Dr. Strauss considered, and we'll find that most of the violence in relationships are perpetrated by men. He did what he thought was a proper scientific study, sent out the survey, and it came back that the initiation of violence in relationships was equal as between men and women. Well, obviously, he'd done the study wrong. So he rejigged the study, and it came back with the same results. The third time it came back, he became convinced that that was the fact. And ever since then, in any responsible reporting agency that does studies that are both replicable and peer-reviewed, we get roughly the same result. So how did we get to where we are here in Canada? Well, what happened was Stats Canada did not measure any violence in relationships until 1992. The feminist movement really got off the ground here in the mid-'80s. And if anyone here can recall, it was called wife abuse. It wasn't called domestic violence. It was called wife abuse. By the mid-'90s or the early '90s, in 1992, StatsCan started to measure violence in relationships, but only measured violence against women. That created a heyday for the feminists on this issue. And between 1992 and the year 2000, the annual Stats Canada reports that measured violence in relationships consistently found that 6 or 7% of women were the victims of violence in relationships. Now, I want to peel back from 1992 to 1990. In 1990, in the 3 months that Kim Campbell was Prime Minister of Canada, she funded a study of domestic violence in Canada. The study took a year and a half or 2 years, cost $20 million, and produced a study which put someone like Peter Jaffe, Dr. Peter Jaffe, the psychologist who works out of London, put him on the map. That study determined that no other woman in the world, I think I'm saying this correctly, would want to be tethered to the violence and the life of Canadian women. If you can imagine. Now we go back to Stats Canada in 1992. They start to measure violence against women. At the same time, we have an NDP government in Ontario. And in the government, there's a position known as the Attorney General. The Attorney General administers the court. Technically, the Attorney General is the lawyer for the government, and the Attorney General administers the court. The Attorney General should be a lawyer. Historically, in all the English-speaking countries, the person who runs the courts and administers the courts is a lawyer. When the NDP was elected in 1990, their first Attorney General was a fellow named Howard Hampton, who had happened to be a criminal lawyer in Northern Ontario, but after 2 years, he was replaced with Marion Boyd. Well, who was Marion Boyd? Marion Boyd, first of all, was not a lawyer. Second of all, she was a self-described feminist activist. So against the background of no Canadian studies about domestic violence where men are the victims, with an NDP government with an Attorney General who is a feminist activist, it doesn't take much to figure out what's going to happen. And what did happen was specialized prosecutors, who are the direct agents of the Attorney General, to prosecute domestic assault and domestic wife assault, as it was called then, start to get formed right across the province. Now, Marion Boyd is remembered for one other incident, or I'd like to draw your attention to one other incident she was involved in. There's a guy called Bernardo. Actually, his first name escapes me now. Paul Bernardo was called the Scarborough Rapist. Paul Bernardo got involved with a woman named Karla Homolka. And after he got involved with Homolka, not only did he rape, but apparently he took the young women that he raped and cut their bodies up, dismembered them, and did some terrible things with them. Bernardo and Homolka get arrested. She's arrested for assisting him in the rapes. She makes a deal with the Crown that she will plead guilty and get a 12-year sentence and give evidence against Bernardo. As the case unfolded, Bernardo's lawyer retrieved some videotapes which proved conclusively that Homolka was actively involved in the recruiting of the young females and in their dismemberment, and participated in the sexual abuse of these young women. With the deal that Homolka had made, she got a 12-year sentence and was presented to the court by the Crown Attorney, who works for the Attorney General, and the Attorney General was Marion Boyd. Homolka was presented as a battered woman. That didn't last very long. Nobody bought it. But that's the level we were at with Marion Boyd, the Attorney General, Stats Canada, not reporting on domestic violence the way everybody else in the English-speaking world was reporting. Finally, in the year 2000, Stats Canada for the first time reported on domestic violence and measured violence against men, and they came out in roughly the same numbers as every other responsible reporting agency had come out. And so we changed from wife assault to domestic violence because now the statistics were there. And to give you a sense of this, the last time I looked, and it's been the same every year since 2000, the last time I looked, it was 400,000 females, 400,000 males. So this is partly how we got here. What's going on now? You heard what's going on now. You heard it from Lawrence. There is still a very heavy component in our system, in our criminal justice system, that's based on the old pre-2000 ideas and statistics. And someone has produced a document called Manufacturing Statistics. And everything Lawrence told you about how they try to induce and entice men into pleading guilty so they can pump up the statistics, that's all part of this overall plan. We're stuck with this. I agree with Lawrence. Where I disagree with Lawrence is I think it is getting immensely better rapidly. I say, and Lawrence will have a chance, I guess, in the question and answer to answer this, I say that if you go into a domestic violence court today, because it's become apparent that the initiation of violence is equal between men and women, that's one reason. There will be a couple of other reasons that I'll explain. Because it's become apparent, the first thing that happens is the prosecutor walks in with a pile of 10 files. And the first 5 files are distributed, they're gotten rid of. The complainant won't testify. We're offering a peace bond. We're withdrawing. The first 5 are gone. The second 5, there's some negotiation and discussion, and eventually there might be one trial, and there might be one guilty plea in the court. Now, there's another aspect to this, and Lawrence hit on it, and I'm going to talk about it and take it in a slightly different direction. The partner assault, what's the middle word for the R? Responsibility system? Program. The PARS program is almost a sine qua non. If you want to get out of this, if you take the PARS program, you'll get what's called a discharge. You won't get a criminal record. Nowhere can anyone find the therapeutic principle or idea behind the PARS program. There are no reports on whether it works. There are no reports on whether it doesn't work, how it affects recidivism. Nobody knows, but this program has been installed. And it's basically a shaming program. Now, I had occasion to participate in an inquest where there was a death in Brantford, and the inquest was held in Hamilton. And in that inquest, it became apparent that the husband, who was the person who had done the killing, had been at the PARS program and had been failed out. And so the PARS program witnesses came forward. There were 5 of them. And I would ask, what is the underlying therapeutic theory or rationale for the PARS program? And each one would say, well, I deliver the program, I don't understand it, you'll have to ask the next witness. Went through all 5 witnesses, nobody could explain it. There's this notion somehow that through the PARS program, men get to take responsibility for their conduct. The simple question I asked each and every one of these 5 people from the PARS program was, after a person has stood up in a court and admitted guilt, what further responsibility can they take? What further responsibility is there for them to take? Because before the whole community, effectively, they've pleaded guilty to an offense. No answer. One of the things that's happened is that the PARS program is now in decline. There was a time when the only thing available was the PARS program. Now they'll take an anger management program instead. Well, what is that about? What does this mean? The feminist theories that grew up in the shadow or in the absence of strong StatsCan statistics, which we got later, was based on a notion called the cycle of violence. I have no doubt the cycle of violence is a syndrome that has some scientific validity to it, that there are abusers who start with a low level of abuse, apologize, get taken back, the abuse continues to accelerate until ultimately there's a homicide. The problem with the cycle of violence theory is that if you accept it as the only theory, you eliminate situational violence. people who have been pushed into a position where have no interest in violence, and then the violence erupts. Most criminal lawyers, and I'm sure Lawrence will agree with me, can tell you about cases where the violence consisted, I had this one, of throwing a chicken wing. The client was prosecuted because that was the beginning of the cycle of violence. The cycle of violence affects, I'm suggesting, and there is no statistics to refute what I'm saying. I'm saying that the cycle of violence affects as many male persons in the community as there are criminals. 3-4% of the male community may be criminals. It'll be 3-4% that are involved in the cycle of violence where the violence escalates. But the feminist push has led the criminal justice system to believe that it's all men. All men are subject to this cycle of violence, and it's a complete rejection of the common sense principle that violence can erupt situationally. You push somebody too far, anything can happen. That applies to men and women equally. I have to say that in the year 2000, I was counsel on an inquest, and I couldn't get one expert that would come forward and talk about the flaws in the cycle of violence. They knew about it, they talked to me about it, they gave me the statistics, they gave me the information, but they didn't want to lose their jobs. By 2010, when I did the inquest in Hamilton, I had my choice of experts who were prepared to come forward, and in fact, inquest counsel brought forward an expert who talked a good deal more about situational violence than this notion of the inherent cycle of violence that was supposed to be in men. So I'm a little more optimistic than Lawrence is about the changes. I think that I should talk at this time about where we're going. More and more we see that women are charged with domestic violence. Lawrence is right. There is no PARS program. As more women get charged, as this social experiment, as it becomes more and more obvious that this social experiment is really a failure, and that if you want to resolve these kinds of problems, you have to attack violence generally. As more and more women are brought before the courts, the emphasis on domestic violence will continue to deteriorate until we get back to a normal situation where 3 or 4% of men are wife beaters, and 97% of men have no place in the criminal courts in connection with this. I don't know if I can go any further. That's what I have to say, and I think Lawrence and I should take whatever questions anyone has. Okay, Lawrence, do you want to come? Well, does he have to be wired up too?
What's the answer to that?
No, as long as they both stay in front of the podium, I'll pick it up.
Okay,
Keep the mic on.
who's first?
But I would really like you to talk about the element of CPIC, specifically that once you're charged, even if the charge is withdrawn, CPIC, as far as I understand, is forever.
CPIC, yes and no. Yes and no.
Could you let me speak to this?
Sure.
All right. Here's what's happened. I don't have it clear, but this is changing as we talk here today. Any interaction with the police will be kept by the police forever. What I think your problem is, and if I have this wrong, I'll yield, but what I think your problem is, who besides the police gets hold of this? Is that what you're talking about?
There's two, that and the part that once you have a record, an incident number, it could be a false allegation of domestic, sexual, whatever. If the sequence of these happen, The police look at it and they go, okay, he got away with it once, twice, three, four
Oh.
times. Now we're gonna nail him.
All right. I can't find a way to say that the police have no right to keep that. What the real issue is that I understand, and what seems to be changing as of today, is who can get hold of that information. There are newspaper articles that there is legislation coming forward that will change who gets to hear whether you're on CPIC or I'm on CPIC or Lawrence is on CPIC. I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, I agree with Walter that it's changing, and it's changing in an interestingly helpful way. What the police are increasingly starting to track is if a complainant calls the police over and over and over again, and as soon as a call is made, even if a charge isn't laid, there's an occurrence number generated. If charges are laid, the outcome is recorded. And if it turns out that the complainant is just a serial complainant who, as soon as she gets tired, she just doesn't like the fact that the guy showers only every 3 days. Well, you keep calling the cops, and sooner or later, they're going to have a chat with you that you really don't want to have. And crowns are going to look with grave suspicion on these allegations. And of course, the problem becomes the boy who cried wolf, that when something really happens, the cops are going to, and the crowns are going to look and go, come on. So I agree with Walter. I think these records should be kept till time immemorial. Is it the fault of the guy who was the subject of the call to the police? No. But we have an overarching social interest in maintaining these records just because. Down the road, something might happen, and you always want to know who you're dealing with if you can. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, but it's just a concern to me. I've spoken with police officers that have explained to me that that's what happens.
Yeah. But let's put it another way. Let's take it out of the criminal justice system. Okay? You're online. You're wearing a nice bow tie. You want another bow tie. You want a self-tying tie, you want a bigger one.
One that doesn't fall apart.
One that doesn't fall apart. So now you Google, and you type in bow ties, silk, how do you tie a bow tie? And you get the websites, and you look at the videos, and the instructionals, and this and that, and you look up some websites that sell bow ties. Track how long it takes for you to start getting emails about bow ties. And for how long? A long time. We're in the information age. We are in the age of social media. It's inescapable. You get pulled over by a cop for a burnt taillight, you're in the system. If he takes down your plate, he runs your plate, you're in the system. Forever, they will know that somebody ran your plate. That's all there is to it.
And that you were at Bay and
Yep.
Bloor on that day,
Yeah.
at that time, driving such and such a vehicle.
Yeah, you have your cell phone with you. You're walking around. They can recreate your steps for the last 5 years if they want. Anything. Forever.
Questions?
Hi, first, thank you both for very informative talks. I'm at a stuck point with one point you made, though. What is the overarching public or social interest in maintaining records of accusations versus records of crimes?
That's what I was talking about. Recently, it's come to be recognized that for police purposes, and I agree with it, that for police purposes, the police need to know, as Lawrence said, who you're dealing with. The question is, who else gets to know that? And up until, and I suspect for the next number of months, almost anybody who wants to know can know. There's a police record check, which only discloses convictions, but there's a vulnerable person sector check, which you may have to consent to if you want a particular kind of job. And so you get acquitted. There's a record that somebody made an allegation of sexual assault and the police investigated and decided there was nothing. That will be disclosed in a vulnerable persons sector check today. Legislation is coming forward. I understand that will, I'm just going by the press, that, and you need to know the criminal bar has been very upset about this and agitating for reform on this. But right now, my understanding, and it's from the press, is that before a vulnerable sector check goes out, it will be sent to you for correction. Not you, but the person who's being checked. So your question is well-founded. It's a serious problem, and it looks like it's going to be attended to.
And just to not go further, but to perhaps add another layer to the response, I belong to a fraternal organization that runs something called Masonic CHIP, which kind of gives away the organization, but that's neither here nor there.
It's a CHIP organization?
It's a CHIP organization. So what it does is, when it runs these programs, parents can come in with their children, and they take a swab, and they create this chip, so that if the child goes missing, and God forbid they find remains or who knows what, they can match up with the database. It's an incredibly important program with enormous upside potential for public safety. How is this related to your question, sir? Well, here's how it's related. You want to volunteer? Vulnerable sector search. They will find out exactly who you are.
And if there's been an allegation
Yeah.
which was withdrawn or
Yeah,
never proceeded
anything.
on. But the new legislation is supposed to somehow cover that by letting you know and giving you a chance to correct anything that's going on.
Sure, but if you have 2 weeks' notice of this program and you're eager to participate, you can kiss any notion goodbye, because these things take weeks and months. It doesn't come back in 24 hours.
Let me follow up with one more. And I know that, you bring up a lot of good points. We're in an information age that's unlike anything else in human history. And so there's going to be countless ethical questions that come into play about information. But again, I'm wondering about the role of, or the possibility of state functionaries having records on individuals of accusations in perpetuity, and whether or not that's really in the overall best interest of the public, or certainly of the privacy of individuals. If you take some men in a bad marriage, during the process of a divorce, the wife suddenly discovers, well, he assaulted her 15 times during the marriage that she never wanted to talk about until she filed divorce, and suddenly that's all she wants to talk about. And there may be phone calls made during the process of a high conflict divorce that go on that record. Couldn't that information, whether it's proven or not, prove deleterious to the individuals in the future? Because we have certain restrictions on who can access information now. Who can guarantee that they won't get it 10 years from now? And with that, I'll just let you answer. Thank you.
The downside of erasing that kind of information is far more serious than the downside of keeping it. Once a record, I'm a firm believer that once a record is created, it should stay forever. We
But-
shouldn't be afraid of things.
But the question is who will have access.
Yeah.
And I believe the question that's come to us, Lawrence, is who are we kidding if it's there? Somebody we
Sure.
may not want, we may all agree should never have it, will get hold of it.
Yep.
That's a serious question. From the police point of view, Lawrence made the point. You're a cop. You have to go somewhere to answer a call. Don't you want to know everything the police know about that individual? Do you take your gun? Do you take a tank, as they sometimes do in some parts of the states? So it's a difficult question.
It's also budgeting. The government needs to know how much how much financial commitment they need to make. I understand why people are concerned about their privacy, but I think we have to recalibrate our notion of privacy right now, because the old notion of being able to keep your dirty laundry stored somewhere is just not, it's done. It's done. I don't have a criminal record, but I guarantee you that, not anymore. I'm kidding. But I guarantee you,
Must have had a good lawyer.
yeah. But I guarantee you that the government knows more about me than I could ever possibly imagine. So, sorry, sir,
You can tell they're asleep.
yeah.
Well, just one quick point on that. I think it was Eric Snowden that said, saying that privacy shouldn't matter to you if you have nothing to hide is like saying that freedom of speech shouldn't matter to you if you have nothing to say. But as a person who has gone through the PARS program myself, PARS, before I even went on my first day, they had sort of like a small interview where I had to meet with the program director, and I was told I had to sign an agreement stating that I wouldn't speak about anything that happened in PARS outside of PARS.
Well, that's for mediation, though. That's not necessarily PARS. PARS, you may be talking about different things, because they do have these mediation things, and the only way it works is if confidentiality of the process is maintained. But PARS, I mean, they generate letters that the person has participated, and this is what we covered, and here's how he responded. So
I've never seen one of those letters, and I'm inclined to agree with the questioner. There's no information.
There isn't.
I've seen lots of them.
And I could assure you I did read that agreement.
Okay.
And I signed it. I was not allowed to have a copy of it for my own records. However, my question for both of you is, how do we go about, what are some of the next steps that we could take to expose some of the things that are happening with PARS, to expose its uselessness, and to make people aware of what's actually going on within this program?
Well, in your case, one of the things you can do is request a copy of that document through the Freedom of Information Act. You'd be subjected to the PIPEDA legislation, which is personal information something or other, but you make a request under the Freedom of Information Act for that record. And if they refuse to produce it, then quite frankly, you just raise a stink. Go to the media and see what you can do. There are so many media outlets today. You don't have to rely on CTV or fascist television the CBC, to
You got it right the first time.
to put forward your point of view. There are 1,000 outlets. Take advantage of one of them. There's an endless supply.
One of the things that has already happened, first of all, I disagree with Lawrence. I think PARS is in decline. It's starting to fall apart. It used to be a 52-week system. Now it's a 26-week, and I think it used to
16.
be 26, and now it's down to 16.
Now, but when I went to PARS, it was 16 weeks for the men, 12 weeks for the women. And according to a woman that I know who did go through the program, the women's portion of the program was pretty much just trying to explain to them how they were actually the victims, rather than getting
Of
them to
course.
take responsibility.
It's a validation exercise.
But yeah, it was 12 weeks for the women when I went, 16 for men.
But one of the things that is happening is you have Cafe. And they put that billboard up on Davenport. And the feminists got very upset. Their feathers were ruffled. Because, and this is me, okay? There's this pendulum theory. There was a time when men were superior, now women are superior, and so on. I don't subscribe to that. I say that the feminist movement we are coping with today is really a pre-fascist movement that is based on the notion that genetically one group is superior to another group. The minute you have a statistic that is solid and unchallengeable, that says that the initiation of violence is equal as between men and women, feminism loses a part of its thrust. And the people who feel they are in the superior group will deny it. They can't accept that there's any equality. Now, I don't know how far you want me to go with this on the statistical side, because their response was, well, yeah, look who gets arrested, so there must be something wrong with this 50-50. If the initiation of violence is 50-50, why don't we see 50-50 in the courts? Because there's a government policy. You only arrest the men. Now that's changing. So there's this struggle going on in that regard. I hope I've answered your question. Okay.
Just as a follow-up, I can tell you, and this happened very recently, a colleague of mine, and I've become friends with him, who was a hands-down true believer in the feminist theory that men are evil and they beat up on women. And you couldn't talk him out of that tree no matter what you did. I went online, I downloaded a report that said 50-50. And I said, here's the report. He said, no, it's probably, that's ridiculous. There's no way, I want a government report. And I said, but right at the top it says Statistics Canada. Anything else? The look on his face was priceless. Walter believes, obviously, in what he is saying. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't say it. But Walter is more ideological than I am. I think that people who believe in that come at it from a good place. In other words, they mean well. And they get caught up in this idea because we almost instinctively like to blame somebody. It's got to be somebody's fault. I just have to find out who it is. And as soon as I do, I know how to fix it.
That's not a good place.
They mean well, but we're people. And what we have to push back, we're pulling away from the age of reason. And Walter and I live in a world, our professional world, where reason is everything. The ability to sift through information, organize it, separate garbage from truth, and act on principle is important. If we didn't have rules in our profession, we couldn't do our jobs. If we didn't have the requirement of having to think through a problem, we couldn't do our jobs. But that's not what's happening in the outside world, outside of the arena of the courtroom. People are just going, oh, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. No, you're in so-and-so. And no, you're in that's how you push back. Or it's one of the ways, sorry. And you say, let's step back and start to do the one thing that really separates us from our fellow creatures on the planet, which is the ability to think and to communicate thought at a higher level.
We have another question.
Yes.
I hope I phrased this right. I'll give it a try. I've always had a theory that things like computers, and particularly forensics evidence, has done a lot to improve crime reduction. I don't know if it has. That's just been my theory. But assuming that it has, and yet we still have the same number of cops, if not more, while crime is going down, maybe they're making more things in the crimes that never used to be crimes to keep them employed. Because I can't imagine.
Absolutely right.
Congratulations, sir. You have now opened the door to the Walter Fox treatise on public service unions. Take it away, Walter.
Well, I can't imagine any cop who's
Well,
making $100,000 a year wanting crime to go away.
Well, yeah, and the really sort of dramatic way of exposing that goes like this. Do you want to go and arrest Joe Citizen, who's never been in trouble with anybody before but has yelled at his wife? Or do you want to come with me on a biker raid, and we're going to raid the biker clubhouse, put on your vest and grab your shotgun?
So the cop on the beat wants to fight proper crime.
Well,
He wants to arrest the first guy.
Again, this is the question you raised is a really interesting question in the sense that nobody actually has the full answer. over the arc of my career, which has been 47 years, crime has gone down by at least 30%, okay, and maybe 40%.
Yeah.
And if you and in a way, it is arguable that domestic violence was invented by the police to get in to fill that gap and give them more work. Now, there's a belief that the decline in crime has a number of sources. One of them is that the proportion of the population that is between the ages of 17 and 45 of the male population is a smaller proportion of the population than it used to be because we're much older as a population. That's one of the reasons. And I've forgotten the name of the guy who wrote the Blink series of books, but he argues that the introduction of abortion in American society some 25 years ago has led to a reduction in crime today because there are fewer unwanted babies. That's one of the theories. There are a number of theories, but there is the irrefutable fact that the rate of crime, that is the number of crimes per 100,000 people, is definitely down. And there is a factor that in this that involves the public sector unions, the police unions. That's something I think we're going to hear a lot more about. One of the observations that I've made is what was not a crime years ago has now become a crime. And what used to be a low-level crime, what we call the provincial offenses crime, has now become a criminal code offense for which you can go to jail. Part of this is the Harper government getting tough on crime and trying to rearrange how the whole system works. And while there's less crime, there is more of a sense of feeling of fear in the community, fear of crime, which nobody quite knows how to reconcile. If there's less crime, how come we're more afraid? I say one of the elements in that is this feminist notion that all men are bad. A man gets on an elevator with a woman. She's afraid. He may be a rabbi, a priest, he may be a pacifist, a Quaker, any one of 1,000 things. She's not taking any chances because she knows that men are bad and women are good. So there's a lot of factors. I'm not really qualified to lay them all out. I just had some thoughts. That's what I think. Lawrence disagrees with me.
I do, and if I ever lose my inherent optimism, my belief that if given a reasonable opportunity, most people will do the right thing. If I ever lose that, I'm turning in my card. I'm going to go flip burgers. I'll do something else because this is ridiculous.
There's a spot at Voice for Men they might want to.
Okay.
Well, that may be the, oh, sorry, no, we're,
Sorry, I know that, how's your time? I know you're engagement.
I have a few minutes, and I apologize. I'd love to stay here, but I just have a few minutes.
If we could then just get Vern Becker from Canada Court Watch, he has a question.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much a question, but talking about the system of change there for both your lawyers. I've just recently been investigating a case where, yes, there's been a guy that's been charged. I think he's been in jail about 5 times, arrested numerous times, and we're conducting an investigation, forensic investigation into the calls. Yes, we've obtained police notes and everything. And one of my colleagues, we do have a connection with the judge, and this is where things are changing. I think only once in the 20 years I've actually had a call from a judge, not wanting to be identified, of course, but we had a contact just within the last 2 weeks with a judge. And this judge, who currently sits on the bench, has told us to do what we can to get another judge off the bench. He's come, and we've also talked to some people at the OPP and another JP, and they've said, get the guy off the bench. That's a pretty bold thing for a judge, even privately, to say in something like that. But I think we are seeing that there are some people I've had court reporters. We are getting calls from people in the system who are afraid to speak out, but they'll do it privately. But I can see a change in the 20 years I've been doing this.
There is a mechanism for doing that. Complaints against judges of the provincial court are handled by the Ontario Judicial Council. Complaints against judges in the federal court system, which is Superior Court, Court of Appeal, are handled through the Canadian Judicial Council or Canada Judicial Council. Complaints against justices of the peace are handled by a judge of the provincial court who is responsible for all justices of the peace. There are mechanisms in place to do that, and yes, you're quite right, people are becoming less afraid of taking advantage or making avail of those opportunities, because judges are, I'm stating the obvious, judges are people, and you get a range of quality, and yes, some judges are more inclined to convict than others. But how could you expect otherwise? That's just the way it works.
Do we have time for another question?
Sure.
I'm ready.
Any more questions?
Hi guys, my question to you gentlemen is, I was recently looking at a report that was issued by the Canadian government in 2004, rather a handbook I should say, which was issued to police departments here, in which advice was given on how to handle domestic violence situations. Part of that advice was based upon the Duluth model of domestic violence, which I'm sure you're both very familiar with. It's power wheel and what have you. Now, this has been roundly debunked in the past, and especially as intervention programs based upon the Duluth model have been shown to be useless, utterly useless. So my question is, why is it that we're in a situation where police authorities are just unthinkingly taking this advice, using it and training their police officers to go into domestic violence situations and to automatically make some pretty crass assumptions about what they're going to see?
Well, the danger, I think, in what's happening is precisely that they are not doing it unthinkingly. It's a double negative. They're doing it with an enormous amount of thought and planning. Remember, it's budgeting. Show me the money. If you start to decide that men aren't that bad, that you don't really need to destroy them from the word get-go, you're not going to need as many officers. Well, that means you don't need as much money. That means the union doesn't get paid as much in dues. That means a whole bunch of things that you don't want if you're a career police officer.
Sounds like me.
Well, it was bound to happen. It's the laws of large numbers, Walter.
And not so well.
It's the opposite. They do it with great thought, and that should be of great concern to all of us.
I did not hear what you said about the year 2000.
2004.
Which model did they use?
In the Canadian government's handbook, they used on page 6, I believe it was, they used what was called power wheel.
The Duluth Power Wheel.
Okay, the Duluth Power Wheel. I can't think of anything that is less useful and more offensive than the Duluth Power Wheel. The Duluth Power Wheel was created in the early 90s in Duluth. Of course, that's why they named it the Duluth Power Wheel. And we had that period where the women's shelter movement took off. And Aaron Pizzey can talk to you about that, and so can Senator Ann Cools. And the late June Callwood also got involved in the shelter movement. And there was a real thrust through that period of time that the frontline workers knew all about everything. And these frontline workers generally had very low levels of education. They were not experts, or they were not trained in anything. They were usually someone who was a nice person and had made it through to grade 10. And they set the policy, and the Duluth Power Wheel came into existence. As recently as 2010, during the inquest I was involved with at that time, it was debunked. It has fallen out of favor, and it's not used by anybody anymore. It's purely childish and really goes nowhere and gives us no insight into anything. There's no scientific validity to it. I don't know if, let me digress just for a second. When the shelter movement got started, it was started by people like Erin Pizzey, who eventually rejected it because she concluded that the women that were coming to the shelter were violent. Ann Cools, she was not that, I think she was Senator Ann Cools, started a shelter called Transition House, and June Callwood started a shelter called Maggie's Place. Started, got the financing for it, got the location for it, staffed it, did all the work. And in both cases, the workers formed a commune. These were people who had not done anything to create the place. They formed communes, and they threw both June Callwood out of Maggie's Place, and they threw Senator Cools out of Transition House, alleging that Senator Cools, who was from Barbados, was a racist. And so this was like all in the heyday of 1992, 93, with Marion Boyd as the Attorney General and all of that going on. As far as the police are concerned, my experience is different than Lawrence's. My experience consistently, when I saw clients coming through my office who had been arrested on domestic assault, they were always treated properly and even cordially by the police. And why? Because the police forces are still to this day predominantly male, and each and every cop knows that he could be next. If the accused person that they arrested had a criminal record for robbery or something else, they would be treated accordingly. But if it was pure domestic violence, the police did what they had to do. Now, Brian Jenkins and myself and Eric Tarkington actually made a presentation to the higher levels of the Toronto Police Force, the domestic violence section, and it became very apparent to us they were just following orders. What a bad phrase, but their heart was not in the domestic violence arrests. Of course, there were some cops who did feel that way, male and female, but the vast bulk of the cops were just doing what they had to do, and they were arresting the man because that was the policy that came down from the Attorney General and the Solicitor General. Now, there's a little sidebar. I don't know how far we want to go with this. We made a presentation that went like this. When a man is released on bail and he's not to have contact with Susie, the police call Susie and they say, Susie, he's been released, but he can't have contact with you. In law, Susie is as bound by that order as he is, because it's nonsensical that he can't contact her, but she feels she can contact him. So we made the presentation to the senior level of domestic assault police. They agreed with us. They would have loved to arrest Susie if she called him, and well, that's the way it always went. Everybody knew that when an accused is released, not to contact Susie, Susie's going to contact him. But their instructions were not to do that arrest, coming from the government.
Okay.
I'm applauding you.
Oh, no, don't do that.
All right, thank you
very
very
much.
much.